Welcome back, everyone. We are going to get started with our panel discussion. Let's see here. Hi, Gabe.
Hello.
This talk is XR collaboration, the future of the building industry, and we have a lovely panel here today. We have Gabe Paez, founder and CEO of The Wild and CEO of Iris VR, who will be moderating the discussion today. And then we have three amazing panelists, which I will let Gabe introduce. So let's talk about Gabe first for a second here. Today we'll have a robust discussion led by Gabe Paez on XR collaboration for building industry with leaders Viviana Devdas from Autodesk, Rawle from Gilbane, and Dace Campbell from McKinstry. Thank you so much for being here today. Gabe is the founder and CEO of Wild Technology, Inc., the global leader of immersive collaboration software for the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. Wild Technology owns and operates the Wild and Iris VR, which enables professionals to work together in augmented and virtual reality from anywhere in the world. Both products are used by industry leaders, including interior architects, Perkins & Will, KPF, Leo A. Daly, McKinstry, Mortensen, Gilbane, and Verizon. Welcome, Gabe and crew.
Thanks. How do I actually turn this on? Do I just talk into this?
You can talk into that.
Hello, hello. All right, I'm just going to talk into this one. Oh, off. Okay. So, super excited to be here to talk about XR collaboration for the building industry. This is, a subset of the broader collaboration topics that have been shared in this room. We're looking at a specific vertical focus and how really XR and XR collaboration more specifically applies to this industry. So as Clay said, my name is Gabe Paez. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called The Wild. I've been working in immersive technologies for my whole career, and it's just it's an amazing time, and I'm sure all of you would agree with me, that this is just an amazing time to be living in for people who've been passionate about this technology for their whole lives, who've dreamt about this, to see it coming together, to see real businesses being created out of this. And these fundamental ideas that we've been talking about for so long in an R&D sort of like, what if, how could it be used, actually being rolled out in real practical application. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So whether you're a fan of the buildings industry, a part of it, or whether you know nothing about it, I hope you get something from this in terms of how we can really take a fresh look at a specific type of a customer and how we can create products in XR that are very targeted and very focused and solve real world problems for that customer. So The Wild is an immersive collaboration platform to work together in XR in both augmented and virtual reality. We can solve a specific, and we'll talk more about this, not just around The Wild specifically, but around this idea of XR as being a bridge between the virtual and the physical, and how actually that is a specific value that is so inherent in what this industry does. We're trying to take ideas and build them out in the physical world. And so The Wild is one manifestation of that. How can we work together in XR to envision and experience and align on what a building or an environment or whatever you're trying to construct may be when it's still in the idea stage? So I'm joined today by three amazing leaders in this space. This is a real treat. They have deep experience both in XR and in the building industry, also referred to as AEC for you newcomers, architecture, engineering, construction. So those two terms may be used interchangeably through this presentation. Dace Campbell is a nationally recognized expert and strategist in innovation tools and processes for the AEC industry. He's the director of product management and construction at McKinstry and a licensed architect with over 30 years of experience in design construction research and application of XR technologies to support collaboration, efficient decision making, and his projects have won 4 AIA BIM awards. And I should explain, I'm going to explain, try to debrief these acronyms as we go through them, because unfortunately AEC is just prone with acronyms. So BIM, Building Information Modeling, this is going to be something we talk about a lot. It was a revolution that really happened to this industry a while ago. Not a while ago. In the mid-2000s, started even earlier, but really gained speed in the mid-2000s, and now is just the industry standard for how buildings are modeled. So great leader right here, lean architecture and IPD he's been published internationally. Okay, Viviana Devdas is a design technologist and designated specialist of AEC VR products at Autodesk. As you all know, probably know, Autodesk, huge leader in 3D, but specifically as it relates to the building industry. And so she'll be representing Autodesk today. She helps customers adapt advanced visualizations and VR, AR, MR solutions into everyday design workflows. She's a trusted advisor for enterprise priority customers and helps in minimizing downtime by troubleshooting specific issues. With a background in project management, digital architecture design, and construction management, her journey into AEC industry as a project architect, EU exchange scholar and designer, BIM VDC coordinator, and social media manager has been a rewarding one. So really seeing all different sides of this. Last, we're joined by Rawle Sawh. He is Gilbane's Director of Virtual Design and Construction, specializing in one of the most exciting and fast-growing areas of construction management today, 3D Building Information Modeling, BIM. And Virtual Design and Construction, VDC technology. Rawle works closely with project teams to create detailed virtual construction models of a project's lifecycle to improve the speed and accuracy of estimates. Since 2007, Rawle has provided support to some of New York City's largest and most complex projects, including Columbia University's Manhattanville Development Phase 1 project, as well as Delta Terminal at JFK International Airport. All right, so I'm gonna let each of them now debrief on sort of their background with XR and how it intersects with their work. So starting with Dace.
Thanks, Gabe. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of being in the XR space now for a few decades. I think earlier in the day, Ori Inbar had mentioned Tom Furness as the godfather of VR. I had the privilege of working with him in the early 90s. I'm one of his many godchildren. But you can see some of just a smattering of some of the kind of milestone projects I've been involved in. Anything from the Green Space project in the early 90s where we had, it was the first transoceanic immersive virtual environment where we had 4 people immersed. I mean, this is pre-web, pre-Netscape. We had people immersed across an ocean playing a game together. I ported that over to an architectural scenario where we, and it was a bit of a predecessor to some of the things like the great tools like The Wild are doing today. Ideas that you could put a model on a table at a dollhouse scale and interact with it and cut sections with it. So it's some really groundbreaking stuff. I've been involved in the privilege of being involved in some early AR from about 20 years ago, building the first set of construction documents in AR, the first AR experience on a construction site at full scale. Lots of great things. I could talk all day about all the fun things I've been involved in, but I'll just leave it, the last image on the lower right there, just a teaser. Welcome you to come to my presentation on Thursday to talk about how we used AR in the field to enjoy some substantial labor productivity gains.
And Vivica?
Hello, everyone.
I got you. Oh.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Viviana Devdas. I'm an architect. I'm also a construction professional. I started working for Autodesk in 2017, but my VR journey starts much earlier than that. So I belong to the generation which has experimented with a ViewMaster, and I've always been in awe of how much virtual reality can do for us. So within Autodesk, I'm involved in a lot of research projects. So one image you see on the bottom right, that's my CEO, Andrew. So he is experimenting with one of our projects we had done using 3D Studio Max, Revit, and Unity. So it was kind of a gaming kind of project where Andrew had got to assemble the different parts in virtual reality. My journey has been a fun one. It started by going to a lot of hackathons, and I was amazed at how much you can learn at a hackathon just by networking with folks from across the globe, and they may be non-architects, but you get to meet so many different folks. And when everyone combines together in a team, what the output is amazing. So I'd like to talk about one of my recent hackathons I had gone before the pandemic. I partnered with a team from the Keynes group, the entertainment group. She was a film producer, and another developer who works for Logic. So we together, so I brought in the AEC piece. So 3 of us together, we decided to do something fun for buildings. So we came up with a solar glare app, which actually, if you have the sliders, like you can slide from left to right, and you can actually increase how much light enters a building in VR. So we were able to walk through in real time, and we were also able to move the sliders to see how much daylight actually enters the building. So that's one project, but I'm always in, looking for chances where I can actually network with folks from other disciplines as well. So that's about me, and over to Rawle.
Yep, hand it off to Rawle.
Hey, folks. So quickly, so I have 15 years of experience in New York City as a builder. I think I probably have the least amount of experience with XR here. Definitely not 30 years of experience as Dace does. I'd say my experience is probably limited to maybe the past 7-8 years, and really started with Iris VR in New York City. And so really, I think I consider myself a builder first. So I'm not going to come up here and tell you. So I'm not the guy on the right that you see there, right? I'm not the techie, I'm not the evangelist who's going to tell you technology is going to solve all of our construction problems, right? But I will tell you that as a builder, I understand the value that technology does have to what we do, and it plays a tremendous role in what we have, in what we are doing. And I think as we talk about the AEC industry here, I think it's worth noting that I do have my master's in architecture, but I've never worked a day in my life for an architect. And I think that's kind of helped shape who I am and helped shape kind of the direction that we've taken, or I've helped taking Gilbane, our construction company, with. So
That's terrific. Okay, let's sort of dive into this. First, let's go ahead and start with Dace. Can you frame up at a very high level for this group what the role of XR is in the buildings industry?
Yeah, sure. Obviously XR is an emerging technology, arguably. It has emerged, and we could geek out all day, and we will for the next 3 days, about it as a technology. But when I'm talking about XR to those in the building industry, it's really framed up as an effective decision-making tool. Whether you define an effective decision as a more confident decision, a faster decision, fewer decisions to arrive at the right one. There's any number of ways you can measure it depending on what phase of the facility life cycle you're in the design, construction, or operations and maintenance. But in the end, that's what it is for us. It's a tool that helps us make more effective decisions.
That's great. And Vivica, can you give us an intro into the whole project life cycle of an AEC project, and how potential XR workflows can be applicable in that life cycle?
So globally speaking, AEC industry is one of the largest industry, but like all of us know, we are faced with a lot of challenges. So I just don't want to go into a lot of challenges, but I want to highlight 2 important challenges that we accompany throughout a building life cycle. So one challenge is there's a lot of data around us. If you take a building from a conceptual design to completion, there's huge amount of data, and this data is siloed. So in order to have a seamless collaboration, we should have easy access to this data. On one hand, you have like all these latest technologies. You have, hardware and software solutions. You have optimization tools. All these add on to the multiple layers of data. And on the other hand, you have, a lot of pressure from clients. You have to follow rules. You have to build in accordance to some regulations. And you also have a lot of other challenges which cause delays. And, like 98% of projects, construction projects, whether there's a pandemic or not, you're still going to face a delay, and you're still going to lose a lot of money. So how do you solve these stacks of data, and how do you solve all these challenges which come, which cause a lot of delay and you lose money? So that's where XR comes in. XR is the key to solving these huge, big challenges, which which would a lot of things happening in the XR world. So I want to highlight 6 use cases here on how actually extended reality, can bring value to this entire ecosystem. So within Autodesk, we have a team which is working very hard to actually develop a lot of case studies or use cases based on, right from designing in XR to managing your physical assets. And I think we face a lot of challenges when we test each use case with our product platforms. And one important aspect or one important use case where we are still running into issues, but we are making good progress, is collaboration and design review, because VR is not just visualization. It's much more than visualization. It's like overlaying the data and also collaborating with multiple stakeholders all over the world. And also to take that, if you find an issue in a building, are you going to, you're still going to save time before you're completing the building. You're going to go back to your drawing and you're going to make that change. So I think we are, one of the use cases we are developing is we want to really improve on this collaboration. And then finally, the piece where how are we going to manage the physical assets after the building is completed. So the traditional building life cycle is, it's not, it's beyond these physical boundaries, where we really want to, when we are handing over the building to a facilities planner or a building owner, we really need to make sure that he has the data he needs and all in one place.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people criticize the XR industry in general as being subject to being a solution in search of a problem. And this is something that a lot of the skeptics bring up. I'm curious, Rawle, how you think, what are the core problems that are being solved by XR, and why are those problems important?
Yeah. So one of the things that's important to me, and I think we need to take a step back before we move forward, right? So someone who's way smarter than me said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And so if we fast forward, right, one of the things that we need to look at is from a contractual standpoint, and I'll try not to bore you with contracts and all that sort of stuff, but from a contractual standpoint, it's kind of built in, it's inherent to the AEC industry, right? So owners, kind of similar to you all, right? If you're undergoing a renovation in your home, you're going to hire a GC, a general contractor. That general contractor is responsible for hiring all the different sub-trades, the mechanical, the electrician, the plumber, all that sort of stuff. And so owners, specifically ones who think they are more sophisticated than they really are, look to get a deal, right? And so they think that they can go out and hire all these individual designers individually and get a better deal. And so what happens is that you're losing the collaboration amongst the different teams, the different team members. And so you end up working in silos. Your teams end up working in silos, as Vivek has said. And what happens is when you work in silos, right, nothing gets accomplished and everybody starts pointing fingers at everyone else, because who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for that? Who's responsible to make sure that the electrical closet meets code, right? It's not the architect, because the architect's not working for the electrician. The electrician's not working for the architect. So it just kind of snowballs, excuse me, not spitballs, snowballs into just bigger problems, and that leads into, as Viveka was saying, the construction delays. 98% of jobs have construction delays and things like that. And so, lastly, we've all heard about the 7 deadly sins, right? So the 7 deadly sins are those transgressions which are fatal to spiritual progress. And so, how I take that as it pertains to construction is that contractual methodology that we just talked about is one of the 7 sins, or one of the sins that are basically one of the transgressions that are preventing us from getting better as an industry.
Yeah, and how would you frame that up, Dace? Why do you think XR is important for the future of buildings?
Well, as I mentioned before, we look at XR as a tool for enabling effective decision making, and it does so in a number of ways. It helps us increase our our ability to collaborate and communicate and make more confident decisions. And it does through spatial experience, right? I mean, we're all evolved primates with 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 ears, and that's the way we understand and interact in space, and it taps into that. Maybe no better way to sum it up than my favorite Far Side cartoon there on the right. If you can't read the fine print, it says, suddenly a heated exchange took place between the king and the moat contractor. We've all been in that situation. Some of us as professionals have been in the contractor situation. If you've ever done a home renovation or a home improvement, you've been the king. But as an industry, we depend on poor data and poor representations of data, and that's where mistakes start to happen. So XR gives us a fighting chance of getting past that. There's probably a number of ways to look at XR. Me personally, I tend to look at it in terms of the business value it brings to the AEC industry. Even in 2021, there are haves and have-nots in our industry. Who has XR, who's doing it? So it's still a differentiator for those of us who use it and can influence our top line, our revenue. Maybe more importantly, it can increase our bottom line, our profitability, whether you're looking at that through increased productivity or increased efficiency. Now, those two aren't unique to AEC, but as you kind of go down the list, there's a few more. I mean, we really care about quality and getting it right the first time, avoiding having to do costly rework. Safety is ultimately the most important thing for our industry. We want to make sure everybody goes home just as safe as they came into work. XR has uses that apply there. We want to avoid that solution in looking for a problem. We got a lot of problems, and XR can definitely help there. And then lastly, the idea of business continuity. In a pandemic situation, we've all, in our industries too, we've had to figure out how to work from home, and XR has given us a fighting chance of keeping up and being able to look over each other's shoulders at design intent. If you want to move to the next slide. I don't need to lecture this group at all about the differences between VR and AR, but it's important when you're talking with AEC professionals, if you're trying to pitch to AEC pros or help understand our industry, we have different needs depending on where we are in that facility lifecycle. In pre-con and in design, VR the conversation is centered around VR because you're fully immersed in an artificial environment. If you're out on a job site in construction or in operations and maintenance, it becomes an AR-based conversation. That's a really important distinction to make. And if you look in the upper left, there's a good diagram. More than half of our industry is waste. We're not as good as manufacturing. We strive to be like manufacturing in terms of our ability to reduce waste. But when you're talking to a designer or you're talking to somebody on the construction side of the fence, you have a different conversation. It's really the same goal, but in design, you're talking about trying to increase productivity, increase value, increase what they can to get to the right decision. In the construction side, you're talking about you've got a finite product you're trying to create. You're trying to use the fewest resources you can to get that put together. And so it really does center around a VR-based or an AR-based conversation, depending on which professional you're talking to.
Thanks. Maybe, Rawle, can you make this real for us? Give us some examples of how Gilbane is using XR today to solve problems.
Yeah. So typically end users aren't involved in the design process, right? So think of a homeowner, a first-time homeowner who is going to buy a house. They weren't part of the design process, so they couldn't necessarily design the house themselves. Or a surgeon, right? They're not designing the operating room. And so just a quick story, right? So my wife and I bought a house a number of years ago. It was a fixer-upper. When we invited our family over to come take a look at it, they looked at us like we were absolutely nuts, right? They're like, what the hell did you guys see in the house? And that's the difference, right? XR allows us to get the end users to really understand the vision of what that space is, what it's going to look like. How many people can look at a set of plans and specs and sections and say, oh, I know exactly what the space is going to look like, right? Look at a 2x2 sample of, oh, this is your paint color, and how does that going to look in the entire room? And so right, we have an entire group that helps us build out these XR experiences where, I mean, as a first-time home buyer, you can go through a space and choose your cabinet colors, your flooring, your wall type, and all that sort of stuff. And so if we fast forward to the next, from an operational standpoint, as a surgeon, right, the last thing you want is, if you're being operated on, you want the surgeon to be just as comfortable as possibly can be when he or she is operating on you, right? So that means making sure that the boom supports, the lights, the med gases are everywhere they need to be. And so in a traditional design process or in that siloed approach, that doesn't happen. And so XR allows us to engage that end user. It allows us to engage our design teams so that we can do that throughout the entire process.
Great, thank you. And what about for you, Dace? Can you give us some examples of XR in use at McKinstry?
Yeah, and you know, we were coached not to brag about the Wild, but I will for a second. It's a tool we've invested in. We're very, very proud to have the Wild as a partner because of their vision and being able to bridge the gap between VR and AR. Here's just a snapshot of a recent demo actually we had to our engineering crew, where we had, I think, about 8 people immersed, 5 immersed in our office physically, and other people around the country and around the globe, looking at use cases of VR for the designer. And what you see here is a snapshot from some of that experience. And I don't know how obvious it is. There's actually 3 people you see immersed in that picture. There's the 2 bigger ones, and then there's a little guy standing in front of the drawings, marking them up, building 3D models over the 2D sketches. They're having a design collaboration session, really, really effective. A lot of good tools to support collaboration. But even dialing back a little bit, as nice as those tools are, the inset drawing or the inset image there, those are a couple of senior engineers who, for one reason or another, don't have access to the building information model. They're not Revit users by profession. And in the time of the pandemic, they have lost their ability to look over the shoulder of their junior designers doing the hard work at the keyboard. They've picked up XR, specifically picked up VR, as a way to finally get a chance to see the model, see the design intent, without having become a high priest at the keyboard accessing a building information model. So it really is a tool, in our case, for democratizing that building information model and all the rich data that comes with it, and being able to give that and present that to somebody who's a relative laggard in terms of technology effectiveness, and give them a fighting chance of keeping up with some of the more higher end uses of the way data is moving around in the design process.
And then, Viveka, can you give us some examples of how Autodesk is utilizing XR today?
So we have over 80 products in our portfolio, and on the next slide, you can actually see that we have we place a lot of trust in our partners. So we really want to use all our product platforms, give value to our partners, and build this XR ecosystem in tandem. So another area of focus we are trying to achieve is to centralize this data in a platform where you have all the different software like Revit, CAD, Inventor. So we really want to centralize this data and then take it into XR. So that effort is happening. It's going to happen over. It's happening slowly, but you will definitely have more insight into how this data is centralized. A little more insight on the different kind of tools we have within Autodesk. For example, Revit is the most common platform you use for AEC, where you can actually create, model, and also review buildings in MEP. So you can also design mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, as well as fire protection systems using Revit. And Inventor and AutoCAD are 2 other big pieces of the software where you can actually have DWG drawings come from landscape architects, survey drawings, which can be overlaid or which can be used in Revit models. And then in Inventor is another great software where you can actually create factory assemblies. So what's important and what's interesting is with Inventor and AutoCAD, you have data formats that can be brought into Revit, And then Revit as a whole, you can take the building model into cloud platforms like BIM 360. And you also have softwares like Fusion and Navisworks. Navisworks is very important for clash detections and for identifying building flaws. And again, for extended reality, we do focus a lot on partners, but for the 3D modeling, we have packages like Maya, we have 3D Studio Max. We also have InfraWorks, which can actually bring an entire site in real time. So say you have a project where you could bring the site plan in a 3D format in InfraWorks. Then you could use AutoCAD for DWG, and then you could use that as a base and then modify or build your 3D model inside Revit. And then that entire package can be taken to the cloud. And you also have packages like Vault, which is completely a data management system. So on the next slide, I just want to throw a small example here where, there's a lot of misconception that, virtual reality is just, it's more towards the media and entertainment. But I partnered with another software engineer in Autodesk in the Dublin office. So she's a non-architect and I'm not a software engineer. So both of us had this idea of, we looked at this game called Spelunky. And like all of us know, games are based on level generation. So somehow we wanted to make the connection between gaming and between AEC. So we built, I helped build the 3D models and she helped build the code in C++ and Unity. So we actually designed a dormitory. So we designed the 3D asset in 3D Studio Max. And then when we took it into Unity, we actually came up with an algorithm which will procedurally generate different design options. So you have, it's automated, you have design options, and you're also using a technology where you're connecting the gaming as well as the AEC. And in essence, you're making this whole experience more fun. You're not just stuck with one design, but you have a variety of design options to play with. And this algorithm, when you tweak some values, you can get more and more permutations and combinations of this design. And some of the other projects in progress, I just want to highlight a few projects. So a few years back, a company called Sasaki, it's Boston-based, they did a campus planning program, and they used a lot of student movement. They captured the student trajectories in social places, etc. So something like that, a technique like that, where you have a huge site plan, you can overlay the movement of people. You can use extended reality technologies to map their moments, and you can recreate the site plan or the campus plan. And other projects like retail. Now, retail is gaining a lot of momentum, especially in companies which use robotic structures in XR to assemble to assemble automobile parts, and also to have that dedicated space in a retail showroom. For instance, if you walk into a Benz showroom, you might have you could drive a car in extended reality without even actually doing it physically. And then another aspect we are trying to experiment is rendering a particular prefabricated building at different times of the day. So you can actually capture in real time how this building is going to look after it's completed. And another thing is a sandwich kind of design, where you can break apart this design, and you can also show that to a non-architect who can actually understand this design in an immersive environment.
That's great. I'll go ahead and pose this question to Dace. What do you feel like the greatest challenges are that our industry faces in the adoption of XR? What are the barriers right now?
Do we have enough time for this one? There's maybe a couple, and one of them is still, it goes back to that idea that it's perceived as a solution looking for a problem. And sometimes it's still perceived as a tool, as a toy, not a tool. So those are kind of two of the bigger ones. Maybe the heart of your question, though, is what do we do about that? And I would say a lot of the discussions I have go back to business value what is it that we're trying to solve and how can we measure it? And if we can really measure a successful implementation of XR, we can get past that conversation of, oh, this is just a toy or this is just a solution looking for a problem. So it really comes down to a sort of a business value driven conversation.
Rawle, for you, how have you gained buy-in across your team as you've sort of championed XR, and do you have any tips for basically selling it into the organization, and maybe even an organization that could be resistant to change?
So I think when we start talking about organizations resistant to change, I don't think you'll find an industry, I should say, that's more resistant to change than construction. And so for me, what I've done at Gilbane is really just getting back to the root of the problem, like Dace is saying, is making sure that it provides some sort of business value. And so working with Iris VR and your team, Gabe, we've been able to work with them to say, okay, how can we quickly get this going, right? Because if it's something, and I think one of the barriers to implementation is just the tangibility of it, right? And if that's even a word, but just making sure that, right, in the field, you don't have time, you can't set something up for 30, 40 minutes, right? We have a very short attention span in the field. And so when we have a problem, we have to get it solved pretty quickly. And so if we have to be able to implement something pretty quick. And so one of the reasons why we've liked some of the solutions is just being able to go from a model to XR in a matter of minutes. And so being able to do that has helped us get to a point where now people realize on our job sites that, oh yeah, we can get to that point pretty quickly. Now the form factors and all that sort of stuff, that's a whole nother problem. I think that's another barrier to implementation, but it's really finding the right tool and finding the right solution. And for us, I think we found that in some of the products that are out there. So, and really kind of just sticking with it, right? Understanding the business value, sticking with it, and finding the right tool for the solution, I think, is probably my 3 takeaways, I think. Yeah,
it seems like a quantifiable ROI is definitely helpful, but if there is enough friction involved, it's just going to be too hard to incorporate because of the limited attention span.
Yeah.
I'm curious, Dace had mentioned the democratization of access to the 3D model, and this is something I don't think is unique to AEC. Like, a lot of people, there's a huge barrier to entry to do any sort of work with any sort of a 3D model. And I'm curious, from your experience, Vivica, at Autodesk, what do you think is the promise of this next generation of 3D as it relates to XR, and what do we want to do in terms of the democratization of access to that content?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So first, content is king. So I think, we have to work in parallel with preserving this content, because in my experience, when I work with architects who are actually designing federal projects or high-risk projects where they don't want to expose some of the assets to the public, data security is a huge ask. So I think one of the focus of the organization is also to centralize this data and also to preserve this data. So it's accessible to only a particular group of stakeholders. So the moment anything goes on the cloud, we have seen in different industries there is a data breach. So one thing we are really trying to work across platforms is preserve this data and also to centralize this data. And another thing which I've seen is among architects, they are leaning on to other technologies as well. So one thing we want to do within the company is we want to definitely leverage our platforms. We want to put a lot of focus on cloud platforms like BIM 360 and BIM Collaborate Pro. And at the same time, we want to embrace all our partners who can provide these unique solutions. There is no one size fits all. So I feel as a designated specialist for the company, when I work with different organizations or different customers, there is a customized solution for each design. So even though maybe the architect does a series of healthcare projects and he wants to use VR and AR, he's not going to do the same solution every time. It definitely varies, and how I see it is it's like a jigsaw puzzle, and you need to put in the right pieces. Right pieces can be technology, it can be your budget, it can be even the skill sets you have in the office. You might have an architect, but the architect may not be skilled in C++ or Python. So also I see an organization hiring people outside their regular roles, and everyone should know how to deal with the content. Everyone should know how to break apart this content, and the end goal is going to be the same. The end goal is we want everyone to have easy access to data and also have fun with it, interact with it, and also to get a solution out of it in extended reality.
Thanks. I'm curious if you all have any insights in terms of best practices for building innovation teams inside of companies. Specifically, how to keep from it just living in this world of R&D to really rolling into action and taking lessons learned and actually deploying them in the field on real projects. Maybe Dace?
Yeah, and I will. I have a bias here for sure because I live in our product management organization at McKinstry. That's definitely a good, proven way for us to move the ball forward. Our product management team sits as a bit of a layer between our IT department and the business, and we're focused on managing our technology roadmap, our 5-year roadmap, and solving real-world business problems. So we're where the rubber meets the road, and we're constantly researching, developing, piloting, testing, measuring, proving value, and then trying to operationalize something when we find a success. And having that sort of product management methodology to support it has been a proven winner for us.
Yeah. What do you think, Rawle, what future technologies are you really waiting for that you think will have the biggest impact on traction of XR in the AEC industry?
That's a good one. So I think for us, for me, it really is the form factor, I think. And so it's not necessarily a new technology coming out, but it's the form factor of being able to put on a headset pretty quickly or being able to do that in the field very quickly.
Attach it to a hard hat.
Attach it to a hard hat. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of, look, I'm in construction, I can say it. I think those types of devices kind of look gimmicky sometimes, right? And it's very difficult to expect a 30 or 40-year foreman or woman foreman on a job site to be walking around with that. So I think until we solve that problem, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the form factor is huge. I'm curious if there are other, and Vivica, fill this in terms of even workflow solutions that really need to be in place to really nail this and distribute it broadly across the industry?
So I think with every problem, it needs to go to the foundational level. I think we need to start with the storyboard. We need to think like animators or movie creators, like what exactly is my end goal? What pieces do I have? And then across, when you start this journey of the storyboarding and crafting these little pieces to identify the solution, we do face a lot of challenges. And one challenge I see in this technology is compatibility. So for instance, when I was working with Revit, 3D Max, Unity, and Python, so for some reason, Revit models could not be exported into an FBX format. It would lose textures. And then when I took the 3D Max model in Unity, again, it wouldn't speak. So one big challenge is, I think it's important for us to do the homework, like build a storyboard and also have, in parallel, have your system requirements or have your compatibility tool set, like what version is compatible with what tool and what output do I need.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. I think as we look at like XR for work broadly, even across AEC, it really comes down to these very specific capabilities and how well they work for whatever that professional is going to be. And that's something that Charlie in the previous session was even talking toward. It's a question of when the rubber hits the road, like how well is this going to integrate into my existing workflow, and how much of the workflow are we disrupting? Curious to open this up to any questions that the audience may have. Okay, sure.
Got it on. Hi, I teach at Penn State in the GIS field. So I wanted to put you all in two sides of the table, which is interviewing, the graduating student. So I was wondering, Dace, if you could sit on the side of the employer and say, what am I expecting this graduating student to be able to do in this field? And then for our other two speakers, what should the student be telling the industry person, especially those, I'm guessing only, 80, 90% of the companies in this industry are thinking about this kind of work. So what does that, enlightened student say to the prospective employer about all their great skills that the employer doesn't see?
Wow, great question. I guess as the, putting on the employer hat or the interviewer hat, I'm looking for somebody who's got a learning mindset, and often, graduating students do, but someone who's willing to not just be that young kid out of school who's the technology champion that everybody's going to look to and say, yeah, let the new kid do it. He just graduated. But somebody who's also willing to challenge and learn from the senior professionals who've been putting buildings together now for decades, and seeing just how buildings really do go together and incorporate that kind of knowledge into their technical skill set. So definitely a learning mindset from day one on the job through the rest of the career.
Yeah, I'll echo that. It's just the learning mindset. When I typically interview, and I should preface this by saying I'm also a professor. I teach at Columbia University as well, so I kind of see that same kind of. I'm always kind of viewing my students through that similar lens, and so that learning mindset is obviously important. But that person needs to be resourceful, right? Architect or the construction industry is a very wasteful industry, and we need to be resourceful, oftentimes to a fault. And so being resourceful, being able to problem solve, being able to constantly learn, but at the same time, I think that person also needs to understand the problem at hand, and using their skill set to help solve that problem, or offer up a different perspective to that problem. It may not be right, but it's kind of, we talk about it as like a diversity of opinions, right? I mean, people's upbringings all kind of change the way they view and kind of solve problems, and we view it in that way. That's the way when I interview, I'm looking through that lens to find possible employees.
I think adding to that, see, as a student, you're not going to have all the skill sets. In my opinion, you'll have to unlearn everything you learned at school, because they teach you way too information. And when you actually do the job, it's like you learn things every day. So you just have to convince the person who's interviewing you or the other side that you're interested, and like Dace and Rawle said, just show that passion, and then be open to all the skill sets, and don't be afraid to ask questions, because the first question I asked to my professor, he said, throw that headset out of the door. But I didn't. I took it back home, and this is where I am now. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. No question is a wrong question. And as a student, you can keep accumulating all these skill sets. Students come to me when I, mentor students for, they want a path in this particular industry. Is there a particular certificate course? There's no certification. You just have to learn along the way, and it's a fun place to be in.
Also, I'm just going to plug that thewild.com is hiring in all departments, many open positions. Visit thewild.com. Please, if you're interested in working in XR, fast-growing industry. Thank you.
Other questions? You got one? Here we go.
Great panel, thank you. So you talked a lot about design and build phases. Can you speak to the opportunities and challenges you see for XR once a building is built in the built environment?
Oh yeah. Yeah, so and we didn't put that slide up today, but at McKinstry we're often talking about the low-hanging fruit of XR and where it solves a designer's problem, where it solves the builder's problem. Your question was post-construction, but I would even say there's the middle ground between in the fab shop or the prefab shop. There's lots of opportunities for XR there, really ripe for innovation there. But since your question was post-construction, in operations and maintenance, again, there I see it more of an augmented reality kind of framework for that. There's a couple of different directions we're seeing it going. One is in integration with IoT, Internet of Things. So being able to pull streaming data from smart sensors in the building and being able to visualize that data in real time. And then the other main thrust is what I would describe as the ultimate stud finder. If you've got a good as-built record of what actually went into the facility before it was covered up, before whatever's behind those walls or under the floor or above the ceiling, if you've got a good 3D record of that, AR is a great tool for revealing that to somebody who needs to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
Questions? Oh, here's one over here.
You mentioned IoT, but a lot of this conversation has been focused on interactions and workflows. I'm just ergonomics, form factors, but I'm curious if there are any things deeper in the XR technology stack that you're looking forward to or see on the horizon that you really think could make an impact on XR's uptake into the building industry.
Gabe, do you have that slide?
Yeah.
Great question.
Bam.
Yeah, so we rarely, in an industry conversation, rarely talk about XR in a vacuum. It's often XR with something else that really brings out the value. And as we mentioned, XR and IoT. And we've talked about XR as being a way to democratize the building information model as an extension of BIM. We could hit just about anything around this circle and talk about a pairing. Maybe another interesting one is the tie with reality capture. If we're collecting data about the built environment, whether that's laser scanning and LiDAR or photogrammetry, that paired up with XR sets up a digital twin conversation where that reality capture tool allows somebody to have a digital experience of the physical environment. And the converse is true. XR gives somebody a physical experience of the virtual environment. And so you kind of complete the digital twin cycle by having those kinds of technologies paired up. So yeah, I mean, a short answer is you rarely end up talking about XR just by itself. It's often with some other emerging tech.
Go ahead.
One last question.
This one's going to be a softball, but a fun one, I hope. I'm really curious if you can tell a story about a time you converted someone to love XR, one of these construction people who are maybe a bit stubborn. And can you tell a happy story about converting somebody over to XR?
I can jump in. So just 2020, right? I'm currently working on a project where it's in Buffalo, New York. If you have a chance to go to Buffalo, New York, right? I know we're far away from there, but I'm in New York City. It's the Albright Knox Museum. It's currently under construction. So I'm based out of New York City. Our design teams are based out, our architect is based out of New York City. Our engineer is based out of Germany. Our structural engineer is based out of Seattle. And so with COVID and the travel restrictions that happened, right? Construction never really stopped during the pandemic, except for maybe like 3 weeks in New York City, right? But architects to this point and engineers have still not gone back into the office, right? And so with some of these solutions, the Wild, Iris VR, we've been able to get everyone into the same model, looking at certain aspects of a design. And we've had some of the older folks, the older generation of designers who have always said, no, it has to be done on paper, it has to be done by hand. We've been able to get them to really jump in and embrace it and couple that with like the previous slide that Gabe just showed, the 3D printing, right? We had a complex curtain wall design, we 3D printed it. We modeled it obviously we modeled it so we could 3D print it, but getting the team to experience that in XR from 6 or 7 different locations around the world, I think was something that they just, a light bulb went on immediately. And as soon as they jumped in, you could see that light bulb going off.
Let's give a big round of applause
Thank you,
to our
everyone.
panel and this lovely crew, and Gabe Paez from The Wild.